When a super empath stops reacting, the game changes completely. You see, narcissists don't just enjoy attention, they survive off it. Their entire identity is built around controlling the emotional environment around them. They poke, prod, manipulate, and provoke because they are hunting for a reaction, any reaction, anger, sadness, confusion, it doesn't matter. As long as they know they're still in control of your emotional state, they believe they still own space in your mind and your soul. But when a super empath wakes up to that manipulation and chooses silence over reaction, they're pulling the plug on the narcissist's power supply. Silence is not passive, it's not avoidance, it's not weakness. Silence is strategy. It is the chosen response of someone who no longer wishes to participate in a rigged game. When an empath chooses silence, they're saying, I see the game and I refuse to play, and that's silence. It speaks louder than any argument ever could because the narcissist expects the chaos. They're ready for the yelling, the crying, the begging, but what they're not ready for is stillness. They're not prepared for the moment when their tactics stop working and the super empath no longer gives them emotional access. See, narcissists are emotional thieves. They break into your heart, rob you of your peace, and then gaslight you into thinking the robbery was your fault. But when the empath stops reacting, the narcissist is met with a locked door, no access, no invitation, and they don't know what to do with that. The silence becomes unsettling. They start pacing. They start pushing harder. But the more the super empath stays silent, the more the narcissist starts to unravel. They're used to control. They're used to attention. Without it, their ego begins to starve. What makes this so powerful is that it's not about revenge or destruction. It's about preservation. The super empath is no longer trying to fix, explain, or prove anything. They've reached a point where their peace matters more than being understood. They no longer need to convince the narcissist of anything because they realize that some people need chaos to function. And when you're someone who craves peace, you learn very quickly that engaging in dysfunction is a betrayal of yourself. This shift, this decision to stop reacting isn't easy. It requires a level of emotional maturity and self-respect that the narcissist doesn't expect you to have. They've trained you to be reactive. They've conditioned you to defend yourself, to seek their validation, to play their games. So when you go silent, it's a shock to their system. It forces them to look at themselves, even if just for a second. And in that second, their ego takes a hit, because silence is a mirror. It reflects everything back to them, the manipulations, the lies, the control tactics, all of it. And for someone who has spent their life avoiding self-awareness, that's a terrifying moment. But here's where the power really kicks in. The silence doesn't just affect the narcissist, it transforms the empath. In choosing silence, the empath reclaims their emotional energy. They stop leaking their power. They start healing. They begin to understand that not every attack deserves a response. Not every lie deserves correction. Not every insult needs to be addressed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. Because when you no longer react, you're no longer controlled. And when you're no longer controlled, you're finally free. The narcissist will try to interpret that silence as arrogance or punishment because they can't understand emotional independence. They don't know what it looks like when someone is no longer emotionally dependent on their approval or validation. But the super empath isn't being arrogant, they're being free, they're detaching, and in that detachment they find clarity. They begin to see the narcissist for who they really are, not a powerful, confident figure, but a fragile ego in search of constant praise and control, and that realization shifts everything. When the super empath chooses silence, it creates a vacuum. The narcissist feels it immediately. They sense the energy shift. They may double down on manipulation. They may try to bait the empath back into the drama, but it doesn't work anymore, because once the empath has tasted peace, chaos no longer tastes like love. The silence becomes a shield. It becomes sacred. It becomes a clear boundary that says, you don't get to live in my head rent-free anymore. And what does that do to the narcissist? It leaves them exposed. Alone with their thoughts, no one to blame, no one to manipulate, just them, their ego, and the silence echoing back all the things they tried to avoid. That's not just powerful, it's transformational. Because the empath hasn't just protected themselves, they've destroyed the illusion, they've torn down the false power structure that the narcissist built, and they did it all without saying a word. A narcissist wears a mask so well, they can fool a crowd. They can charm, manipulate, and perform their way into admiration. They project confidence, authority, even kindness when it benefits them. But behind that performance is a fragile, wounded ego desperate for validation. Most people fall for the act. They get caught in the trap because the narcissist knows exactly what to say and how to say it, but a super empath, they're wired differently. They feel beneath the surface. They hear what isn't said. They sense energy before words even come out. And that intuition, it slices through the mask like a knife through paper. When a super empath begins to truly see the narcissist, not the character, not the act, not the persona, but the raw, unfiltered truth beneath it all, something fundamental changes. They stop idealizing the narcissist. They stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. They stop internalizing the manipulation and emotional gymnastics. It's not that the narcissist has changed, it's that the empath's vision has cleared, the fog lifts. The emotional strings are cut. And the moment the mask no longer holds power, the narcissist's control starts to crumble. The narcissist thrives on illusion. They depend on people believing in the image they've created. That image is their armor. It's their currency in relationships, in business, in social circles. And when it works, it gives them power. But the super empath, once awakened, isn't impressed by the surface. They don't get lost in titles, charm, or confidence. They recognize the emotional inconsistencies. They spot the contradictions. They see the subtle digs, the manipulative flattery, the way the narcissist rewrites reality. It becomes so clear it's almost painful. This level of insight doesn't just threaten the narcissist. It terrifies them because narcissists are masters of deception, but they are not built for transparency. They rely on people being confused, emotionally dependent, or too kind-hearted to challenge them, but a super empath in their power doesn't need confrontation to expose the truth. Their presence alone becomes disruptive. Just the way they look at the narcissist, calm and unbothered, says, "I see you." And nothing rattles a narcissist more than being seen by someone who has nothing left to lose and no need to please. At first, the narcissist might try to push back harder. They might double down on manipulation. They'll gaslight. They'll flip the script. They'll accuse the empath of being paranoid, bitter, or unstable. Why? Because they know they've lost the upper hand, and now they're trying to confuse the empath back into submission. But when the super empath remains steady, when they keep seeing through the lies and don't fall back into the old patterns, the narcissist starts to lose their grip, and that's when the ego starts to bleed. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that the empath doesn't need to say much. They don't need to call the narcissist out in public. They don't need a big scene. The shift is internal. It's spiritual. It's energetic. They stop giving the narcissist the emotional feedback they crave. They stop looking for approval. They stop seeking validation from the very person who's been feeding off their insecurities. And this internal shift radiates outward. The narcissist can feel it. They know something has changed, but they don't quite know what to do about it. Seeing through the mask doesn't just protect the empath. It exposes the narcissist. Because when someone truly sees you, you have no more shadows to hide in. The false identity can't survive the light of awareness, and the narcissist, who has carefully crafted their image for so long, now faces an audience of one who isn't buying the performance. That one person, calm, centered, and aware, is more dangerous to their ego than 1,000 critics, because that one person used to believe in them, used to fight for them, used to pour love into them. And now they just see the truth. That truth doesn't need to be broadcasted. It doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It just exists, and the more the empath leans into that awareness, the less the narcissist can control the narrative. Suddenly, the compliments feel forced, the manipulation seems obvious, the cycles become predictable. What once felt like connection now feels like theater, and the narcissist, they feel it slipping. They feel the walls closing in because the only power they ever had was in the belief that their mask was real. The empath's vision becomes their power. It gives them the clarity to walk away, to disengage, or to set boundaries that can't be crossed. And when they do, they don't do it with vengeance. They do it with certainty. There's no emotional outburst, no dramatic exit, just a quiet decision that says, "I see who you are, and I choose myself now." That decision alone is a fatal blow to the narcissist's ego. Because it wasn't rage that exposed them, it wasn't revenge, it was simple, unshakable clarity, and that is something a narcissist can never fake, control, or destroy. There comes a point in every super empath's journey where they realize that kindness without boundaries is self-destruction in disguise. For too long, they've been the ones giving endless chances, extending grace, justifying poor behavior, and shrinking themselves to avoid conflict. But the moment a super empath learns the power of the word no, everything begins to shift, because no is more than a word. It's a declaration of self-worth. It says, I know who I am, I know what I deserve, and I refuse to settle for anything less. That single syllable becomes the foundation for a new life, one built not on fear or people pleasing, but on self-respect and emotional sovereignty. A narcissist thrives in environments without boundaries. It gives them room to maneuver, manipulate, and maintain control. They test limits constantly, pushing to see how far they can go, how much they can take, and how easily they can twist a yes out of someone who doesn't want to give it. When they find someone who's empathetic, compassionate, and giving, they see opportunity. They don't see love, they see leverage. So as long as the empath continues to say yes to things that hurt, drain, or diminish them, the narcissist believes they still have control. But when the empath finally starts saying no, it disrupts the entire dynamic. This isn't just about the refusal of toxic requests. It's about reclaiming space. It's about drawing a line in the sand and saying, I will no longer participate in my own suffering. The first few no's are the hardest. The empath feels guilt, fear, maybe even shame. They've been conditioned to associate boundaries with selfishness, but that's a lie designed to keep them small. In reality, boundaries are the most selfless thing a person can implement. They teach people how to love them correctly, they create clarity, they protect peace, and once an empath begins to see boundaries not as walls but as gates, with keys only trusted people can hold, they start to walk in a whole new level of power. The narcissist, of course, doesn't take this shift lightly. When the super empath begins to set boundaries, the narcissist views it as a threat, because it is a threat to their control, their ego, and their access. They will often respond with guilt, trips, gaslighting, or silent treatment. They'll accuse the empath of changing, of being cold, of being unreasonable, and they're right. The empath has changed, they've grown. They've awakened, and that growth means they're no longer willing to hand their energy over to someone who only knows how to exploit it. What the narcissist cannot understand is that the empath is not acting out of anger. They're not seeking revenge, they're not trying to hurt anyone, they're simply trying to honor themselves, and that, to a narcissist, is the greatest insult because it implies they're no longer the center of the empath's world. The boundary says, I choose me. And for someone who demands to be chosen at all costs, that's unbearable. There's a moment of deep inner transformation that happens the first time the empath sets a bold boundary and stands by it. The anxiety fades, the guilt dissolves, and what's left is empowerment. They begin to realize that their ability to say no is directly connected to their healing. Every time they uphold a boundary, they reinforce the truth that they matter. That their voice matters, that their needs are valid. It stops being about the narcissist's reaction and starts being about the empath's alignment. Suddenly, peace becomes more important than approval. One of the most powerful aspects of boundary setting is that it doesn't require permission. The empath doesn't need the narcissist to agree or approve. They don't need anyone to validate their decision. A true boundary stands with or without understanding. And once the super empath realizes this, they no longer argue about it. They no longer over-explain. They simply state the boundary and hold it. That silence, that resolve, shakes the narcissist. Because manipulation can't penetrate where clarity lies. Boundaries are not just defensive, they're directive. They tell the world who you are, what you accept, and what you won't tolerate. And the narcissist, faced with these new terms, has two choices: adjust or exit. Most of the time, they choose to exit because control without compliance is useless to them, but that exit, that loss of influence, is the beginning of the empath's true freedom. It's where they stop surviving and start thriving. The empath's life begins to expand as they become more comfortable with no. They start protecting their time, energy, and heart. They stop negotiating with dysfunction. They realize that love without respect is manipulation, and kindness without boundaries is just a setup for pain. So they stop bending to be understood. They stop folding to be accepted, and they start choosing themselves boldly, unapologetically, and consistently, not from a place of bitterness, but from a place of truth. Because once the super empath masters the boundary, they no longer fear the narcissist's disapproval. They no longer chase love that wounds. They walk in power not because they became someone new, but because they finally became who they were all along. There's a kind of power that doesn't scream, it doesn't throw shade, it doesn't plot revenge or wish for payback, it simply rises. That's what happens when a super empath decides to stop playing the narcissist's game and starts focusing entirely on their own evolution. They shift their energy inward, they stop explaining themselves, they stop defending themselves, they stop trying to convince someone who benefits from misunderstanding them. Instead, they choose the glow up. And that glow up isn't just about external change, it's an internal transformation that becomes impossible to ignore. A narcissist needs to feel superior. They feed on feeling like they're ahead, more successful, more attractive, more admired. They don't just want to win, they want you to lose. But when a super empath detaches and begins to thrive on their own terms, the narcissist experiences something they can't stand: irrelevance. Because the empath's growth doesn't just highlight what the narcissist lost, it reveals what they were never capable of giving. The glow-up becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, the narcissist sees their inadequacy reflected back at them without a word being said. What makes the glow-up so potent is that it's not rooted in revenge, it's not fueled by spite, it's fueled by healing. It's a quiet reclaiming of power that was once given away in the name of love, loyalty, or obligation. The super empath begins to pour into themselves the same energy they once gave to the narcissist. They invest in their mind, their body, their spirit. They pursue purpose. They rediscover joy. They find strength in solitude. They build peace that doesn't rely on anyone else's chaos to exist. That level of self-devotion becomes magnetic, and the narcissist, who used to be the center of attention, now watches from the sidelines as the empath shines without them. It's the ultimate ego blow, not because the empath intended to cause harm, but because they no longer exist in the narcissist's orbit. That separation alone feels like punishment to someone who needs control to feel secure. The narcissist expected the empath to stay broken, to keep chasing closure, to keep showing up in pain. They never expected the comeback. They never expected the silence, the joy, the elevation, and what cuts even deeper is the realization that the glow-up had nothing to do with them. The empath didn't grow to prove the narcissist wrong. They grew because they finally decided to prove themselves right. This is where the shift becomes undeniable. The empath starts attracting new energy, new opportunities, new relationships that reflect their healed self. Their circle changes, their standards rise, their vision sharpens. They no longer tolerate what they once begged for. They no longer engage with anything that disturbs their peace. And the narcissist can't follow them there, because elevation requires authenticity, and that's something the narcissist can't manufacture. They're stuck, still trying to manipulate rooms while the empath is building entire new spaces that the narcissist doesn't even have access to anymore. What used to work, guilt trips, gaslighting, emotional bait, doesn't even register anymore. It's like trying to unlock a door that's been removed entirely. The empath has outgrown the manipulation, and in doing so, they've rendered the narcissist powerless. That's the real glow up. It's not just physical or financial or social, it's spiritual, it's energetic, it's reclaiming the parts of yourself that you forgot you even had. It's looking in the mirror and finally seeing yourself without the filter of someone else's projection. To the narcissist, this transformation feels like defeat. They'll try to rewrite the story. They'll tell people you changed, that you became cold or distant or fake. But the truth is, you became real. You became whole, and nothing terrifies a narcissist more than someone who no longer needs them to feel complete, because in their world, value is tied to validation, but in the empath's world, value is tied to peace. And peace, once discovered, is never something you gamble with again. As the empath rises, they begin to move in purpose, not pain. They become more intentional, more focused. They stop over-explaining. They stop proving, they start doing. Every win, every breakthrough, every moment of joy that the narcissist is not a part of becomes a silent reminder of who really had the power all along. It wasn't the one who manipulated, it was the one who healed. It was the one who chose growth over games, who chose stillness over chaos, who chose to glow, not to get even, but to get free. This freedom isn't loud, it doesn't announce itself, it shows up in energy, in boundaries, in joy that doesn't need to be justified, and that glow, it's undeniable, it radiates, it attracts, it restores, it redefines. The narcissist sees it, they feel it, they may never admit it, but they know exactly what they lost. Because while they were busy trying to destroy your self-worth, you were busy discovering it. While they were trying to shrink you, you were expanding. While they were playing games, you were building a life. That glow isn't revenge, it's redemption. It's the light that was always inside you, finally unleashed. There's a moment in every super empath's journey when silence becomes their loudest language. After all the chaos, the gaslighting, the emotional highs and lows the narcissist created, the empath reaches a state where they no longer react. And that moment right there, that calm, unshakable silence, is when everything shifts. Because the narcissist survives on reaction, whether it's love, anger, confusion, or pain, they crave a response. It's their oxygen. It fuels their sense of control. But when the empath goes silent, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but out of clarity and strength, the narcissist is left gasping for relevance. This silence isn't passive, it's intentional. It says more than 1,000 arguments ever could. It communicates, I'm no longer playing the game, and that is a wound to the narcissist's ego that no amount of control or charm can fix, because narcissists don't understand peace, they understand power. And when the empath detaches emotionally, mentally, spiritually, without drama, without theatrics, that's when the narcissist starts to panic. Their manipulation has no landing, their words bounce back. Their tactics fall flat, they're no longer center stage, they're met with a void. The empath's silence is not a retreat, it's a repositioning, it's a recalibration of energy. They're no longer trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding them. They're no longer explaining, defending, or proving their worth. They've taken their power back by choosing presence over reaction, dignity over drama, peace over performance. That silence becomes a mirror, and what the narcissist sees in that reflection is not power, it's emptiness. Because without the empath's emotional supply, the narcissist is forced to face the truth they've spent years avoiding. Their power was never real, it was borrowed. The super empath doesn't go silent to hurt anyone. They go silent to heal, to restore, to protect their energy. They've realized that constant engagement with dysfunction is not strength, it's self-neglect. So they exit the conversation not because they've lost, but because they've grown. And that exit isn't always physical. Sometimes it's emotional, it's psychological, it's spiritual. They're still there, but they're not there. The narcissist feels it before they can name it. Something has changed. The buttons no longer work, the reactions don't come, the game has ended, that silence becomes a fortress, and within it, the empath finds their true voice, a voice that doesn't need to scream to be heard. A voice that speaks through actions, through boundaries, through peace. The narcissist, who once felt in control, now finds themselves powerless. They may lash out, they may try to bait the empath back into chaos. They'll do anything to stir emotion because to them, emotion equals control. But the empath doesn't bite, they don't explain, they don't justify, they simply are, and in that stillness lies their greatest weapon. This doesn't mean the empath feels nothing, it means they've learned how to respond without being consumed, they've developed emotional discipline, they've mastered the art of detachment without bitterness. They've realized that peace isn't the absence of noise, it's the ability to remain grounded in the midst of it. So when the narcissist tries to provoke, the empath doesn't flinch. When they try to guilt, the empath doesn't fold. That internal stillness becomes unshakable. To the narcissist, this feels like abandonment, like betrayal, because deep down they always believed the empath would stay, that no matter how many times they pushed, the empath would return, would explain, would forgive. But the empath's silence breaks that illusion. It says, I no longer need your apology. I no longer need your explanation. I've made peace with the truth. That kind of closure, the kind that doesn't depend on the other person. is something the narcissist will never understand. And it's what makes the empath untouchable. What the narcissist doesn't realize is that silence is the empath's evolution. It's the result of countless nights of questioning, doubting, crying, and finally deciding they deserve more. It's born from exhaustion but matured through awareness. It's not a wall, it's a filter. It filters out noise, manipulation, toxicity, and in that filtered space, the empath finds clarity, vision, alignment. They begin to create without chaos. They begin to live without emotional whiplash. They begin to move in a rhythm that doesn't require anyone else's approval. This new energy is undeniable. It's calm, but it's not weak. It's soft, but it's not naive. It's kind, but it's not available for misuse. The empath starts showing up differently in every room, every relationship, every decision. And the narcissist, they're left wondering how someone they once controlled so easily became so unreachable. That silence becomes a canyon they can't cross. No matter what they say, what they do, how they try to pull the empath back in, it's too late. The empath has reclaimed their voice by choosing not to waste it. So the narcissist spirals, not because the empath screamed or exposed them, but because they didn't. The lack of access, the lack of response, the lack of care, it all signals that the narcissist no longer holds any emotional real estate in the empath's life. That silence speaks louder than rage ever could, it says. You no longer matter in my world. And for someone who needs to feel central in every story, that's the deepest cut of all. The empath has risen, not with noise, but with quiet certainty. And that quiet speaks volumes the narcissist will never be able to silence.